Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to those here in the Great Hall at Chartered Accountants Hall and to those watching as part of our live stream. My name is Ian Wright and I'm Director of Business and Industrial Strategy here at the Institute of Chartered Accountants for England and Wales. It's my privilege to host you for this evening's general election hustings, held in partnership with Enterprise Nation, IPSI, the Association of Independent Professionals and the Self-Employed, the Entrepreneurs Network, and Codec, the policy voice for tech startups and scale-ups. Let me just do the admin first, if you don't mind, and forgive me for those who are listening on the live stream. We are not expecting any fire alarms. If an alarm is raised, it will be genuine. Could I ask you to leave by the big doors to your left and to your right, and be escorted to a place of safety by the marshals. You will be in safe hands. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all general elections are significant. However, some are more significant than others. The elections of 1945, 1979, and 1997 set the political and economic tone and rhetoric and the policy framework that lasted for decades. The general election that will take place on the 12th of December, the third general election to be held in 4.5 years, has all the characteristics of being one which could shape the future of this country for years to come. That said, given the current political volatility and increasing fragmentation, it could also result in further ambiguity and uncertainty, in which case, see you again for another election in 4 months' time. You're very much welcome to the general election hustings of March 2020. Now, that uncertainty is reducing confidence, which in turn is impacting upon investment and hiring decisions. Our latest business confidence monitor shows that confidence is at its lowest level since the global financial crash of 2008. That environment is contributing to a dampening of entrepreneurial activity. Although new startups here in the UK have grown steadily for the past quarter of a century or so, since 2017, business creation rates have fallen, while those of our major economic competitors, the US, France, and Germany, have remained stable. Now, this matters because entrepreneurs and small businesses are such a vital part of the UK economy. 99% of all businesses, 60% of all private sector jobs, over half of the UK's entire turnover. And the injection of new ideas from innovative and dynamic entrepreneurs and their teams create new businesses, new industries, new products, and new ways of improving productivity, raising living standards, and making our country more competitive. Political parties ignore the needs of small businesses at their peril. Small businesses need expert and trusted business advisors to help them avoid pitfalls and navigate to growth. I'm proud that chartered accountants in every part of the country reach something like 3 million businesses. And that association between the entrepreneur and the chartered accountant improves not only the performance of an individual business, but the entire economy, driving up productivity and profitability. Here at ICAEW, we're encouraging members to be engaged with our More Than a Vote campaign. And you might have seen the video as you came in to the Great Hall. We're emphasising through our More Than a Vote campaign 3 vital policy areas that need to be considered during this election, as they will impact upon business and society for decades to come. First, technology. As forces such as big data, artificial intelligence and automation disrupt the economy and sweep away established businesses and industries, how can those forces be harnessed to improve productivity and provide an opportunity for, rather than a threat to, employment? Secondly, on the day today when it was announced that concentrations of greenhouse gases, particularly methane and nitrous oxide, have risen to be at the highest levels in human history, how can we lead the way as professionals and as businesses in general towards a net zero carbon future, enabling a resilient and prosperous economy which prioritises sustainability? And thirdly, after a decade of austerity, all parties in this election campaign are now pledging to increase public spending. How should high quality and improving public services be paid for? Put bluntly, how can the election debate avoid misleading and disingenuous comments from the parties which suggest that as a country with an ageing population, we can somehow improve public services, particularly the NHS, state pension provision and social care, without the cost of paying for such services falling upon much of the electorate? And I hope that we will hear some very clear answers from the candidates here tonight. So let me again welcome you for what I think will be a very informative debate at the highest level of personnel from the major political parties. But first, it's my great pleasure to hand over to a real champion of small businesses and entrepreneurs, the founder of Enterprise Nation, Emma Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ian Wright. Good evening, everybody. Lovely to see you here on this general election, warm, wet and windy evening. Ian mentioned that there had been 3 general elections, but actually this is the 4th time we've hosted such an event here at the Great Hall. So I wondered, has anyone been here for the 4th time tonight? Yes, I see some hands going up. Ricky, you've been here 4 times, because of course, as well as the general election, we also had the referendum. So the only point I wanted to make this evening is manifestos may be different and policies may be revised, but the one thing that we do stay firm on Enterprise Nation and at ICAEW and working with our other partners this evening is finding out what each of the parties offer for small business. So making sure that your voice is heard, but also hearing from the parties as to what they'll do for this sector. So I have one little job to do this evening, which is to see about your voting intentions before the debate and then to ask again about your voting intentions post the debate. So if you're happy to go on to slido.com, this is very straightforward, the Wi-Fi network, one Moorgate Place, password diversity, and immediate, oh, we have some answers coming in already. Please tell us how you currently plan to vote in the 2019 general election. Oh, oh. This is like racing cars going down. I feel like saying, come on, Green Party, come on, Brexit Party. Oh, so I'm probably going to stop when we get to about 70 people who have voted, so we can see if that's reflective of this evening's audience. It's kind of between Conservative and Lib Dems at the moment. I have to say, just as you're voting, it's worth, our hashtag for this evening is SB Debate. And it's the same hashtag we've used for all previous events. And it's worth looking at all of the results from the previous years. Just look at the hashtag SB Debate. Okay, I'm going to, oh, we're on 79, 84. Okay, I'm going to call it a halt. Rob, if you're happy to kind of pretty much halt it now on 86. So we're currently pre-debate. We are looking at 36% Conservative, 20% Labour. Oh, and it's still moving. 38%. Any final offers? Any final offers? Put your vote in. Green Party 2%, Brexit Party 2%. So the job of the parties this evening is to change their score on the board, and we'll find out if they've done that post the debate. In previous years, I have chaired the debate itself, but our partners this evening thought that we needed somebody with a fine and objective mind to do the chairing. So instead this evening, you have the great talent of Dan Thomas. Dan is the executive news editor at the Financial Times. I follow him on Twitter and all of his political musings because he is staying very close to politics at the moment and what it means for business, large and small. So for a great advocate of business in the community and in the media, I'm going to welcome up excellent Dan Thomas, who's going to chair the panel debate for us this evening. Over to you.
Oh, what an introduction. Thank you so much, Emma. My name is Dan Thomas. As Emma says, I'm executive news editor at the Financial Times. It's my pleasure to be able to moderate tonight's event. We are here to talk about the B word. Unusually not the other one, but business this time round. And who is the party for business? That is the question I get asked time and time again, and it's not very clear at the moment. The Labour Party gets attacked for, accused of attacking business. The Conservatives get accused of ignoring business. the Liberal Democrats accused of not having a chance of enacting some of their well-meaning policies, and the other two of having their flagship policies co-opted by the bigger groups and having little chance of actually achieving what they want to set out. And this is a point of time when business has never been more important to the UK, with flagging economic growth, poor productivity, and waning consumer confidence. And that's without mentioning the other B word, of course, of which I'm sure we'll hear much of tonight. We have a fantastic lineup, a fantastic group of senior politicians who can take us through what their policies are if they come into power for small business. We have Liz Truss, a Conservative Minister for International Trade, her counterpart at Labour, Bill Esterson, who's Shadow Business International Trade Minister, MP. Ed Davey, Deputy Leader for Lib Dems and staunch free market Liberal. Hector Birchwood, who stepped in for the Brexit Party, is a candidate for Holborn and St Pancras. And lastly, Amelia Womack, Deputy Leader of the Green Party. So please welcome our speakers tonight. Thank you for coming. Bill's just come into the room, so thank you so much. I know there's a delayed train, was it?
Yeah, well, this is the market failure of having a privatised rail network. I'm sure that will speak to some. If ever there was a case for public ownership of our railways, I have experienced it on my journey down today.
I would actually say it's probably because he came from the dimension that is the multiverse where his manifesto actually works. So perhaps maybe Corbynlandia, where elves and unicorns exist, where such money would be had.
Well, let's kick off. I mean, first of all, Labour has got some catching up to do according to our initial poll, but far more does the Brexit Party. So you've got both of you got some jobs tonight to do.
Yep.
I would like to kick off with a slightly broad question, and starting with our member of the Conservative Party. Liz, just to take us through, why does your party deserve the support of the 5 million?
We believe in business. We believe that people who start up their own companies, who set up businesses, are heroes, because you're the people coming up with the ideas, the new innovations, the new products that power our economy, employ people, pay the taxes for our public services. What we want Britain to be is the best country to start up and run a business. And what we're going to do, first of all, is get Brexit done, so we can move on and we can unleash Britain's potential, but also keep taxes low, in particular, lowering taxes on small businesses, for example, business rates. Get rid of some of the red tape that is holding business back, but also level up the country. So making sure that we've got the fibre broadband, we've got the rail services, the road services that are going to help your companies thrive and succeed.
Fantastic. We've had Brexit straight away and a level up, so that's two tick points. Ed, go to you. What does the Lib Democrats bring for the smaller businesses?
Well, as a party that believes in free markets, free trade and competition, we want to stop Brexit. Because stop Brexit is a disaster if you want free markets, free trade and competition. And you'll be tying people up in red tape at the borders, £15 billion worth of red tape according to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. It will be a huge setback for enterprise and business. Of course, it's not just about Brexit, dramatic though that is as a key part of the economic debate at this election. It's also about talent. Business is about talent, whether it's the entrepreneurs themselves or the skilled people that they need. Of course, Brexit means you won't be able to get so many skilled talent. If you want the construction boom that all the parties are talking about, without free movement of labour, well, good luck on that one. You really need that innovation. You need to support individual companies who are enterprising and innovating with the right incentives, but you also need that public sector R&D investment, which was so badly lacking in this country. You need the finance. We need to make sure that when there's that equity gap, particularly for SMEs, there are ways to try to bridge that. And we've seen, peer-to-peer, and we've seen crowdfunding. We need to do a bit more on that to try to bridge that equity gap. And competition. As a competition minister for 2 years, I reformed a lot of the competition law, but I was stopped going the whole way by the then Prime Minister David Cameron. I wanted the American and German system of the prosecutorial system, because unless you have a strong competition authorities, you will hinder the small businesses, the enterprising business, and you'll give power to the large businesses, the incumbents, who want to keep them down. So stop Brexit, yes, you might have heard that, but we want a whole set of reforms to help entrepreneurs in our country.
Hector, maybe we'll be less familiar with your manifesto than the other parties. Take us through what you are planning for small business.
Yes, and I will address actually some of the issues that have already been raised by the Lib Dems.
We can keep it relatively short.
And I will. Now, the first thing I would say about the EU is that it doesn't present free trade. Anybody who understands economics will know that it is a customs union. It is not free trade. What we as the Brexit party advocate is free trade, global free trade. So first of all, it's a definitional question, and I believe that we have the right answer, which is global free trade and laissez-faire. Now, what can we provide for businesses? If you look at our manifesto, for any business that earns under £10,000 in profits, £50,000 in profits, and pays £10,000 in tax, so in corporation tax, we will give them completely zero tax-free and a completely zero tax-free allowance. Other things that we will look at are business rates. And I think this should open up a wider debate. A wider debate in what we're doing, which is effectively removing business rates and having a debate about exactly how tax is levied across the whole country, which is an important component if we're going to be tackling the issue of business rates, because it does cost us £30 billion, nearly £30 billion, about £29 billion to the exchequer. So that money has to be found somewhere. And that is a key question which none of the parties want to address, but our party wants to address and take on head on, because we need to readdress the way that tax is levied across the entire country and across our entire tax base.
We'll come back to some of these more specific policies in a bit. But Amelia, take you through. I mean, I don't think anyone in the room would disagree with the push for zero carbon and the broader policy that the Green Party represents. But they don't really know your business policies, and there's a lot of money being spent.
So I think that what's quite interesting actually is I've met a number of Conservatives that have joined the Green Party because of our policies on small business. Would you believe it? Because it's the Green Party who want to promote our small businesses in our communities. It's your businesses, the small micro enterprises and cooperatives that are like the fingerprints for our communities. And we want to be making sure that those opportunities, that it's your businesses that are supported by doing things like making sure that we get rid of business rates that are completely broken.
You're doing very well.
I'm glad that I've learned to project my voice. I hope you all got all of that. That means it's going to be a lot louder for the rest. So we want to be making sure that we get rid of business rates. It's an entirely broken model, and instead introduce a land value tax, meaning that it's those who own the land rather than those on the land that are paying for increase in the value of that area. We want to be making sure as well that we encourage our leisure activities in our communities by reducing VAT on things like restaurants and cinemas and all of those things that people want to be able to go out into their communities and enjoy, as well as supporting those businesses that deliver them. But also, as someone who has been working freelance in the past, I know what it's like when you're going from contract to contract, and at the times that you're busiest is the exact time when you need to be bringing in new opportunities. And our idea of introducing a universal basic income that would mean that every person would get £89 a week to support them in whatever they want to achieve is an opportunity to support those freelancers and even support those entrepreneurs who just need that little bit of cash to know that can keep a roof over their heads, can keep food on their table while they're going out and delivering the new projects that do such incredible things in our communities, in our country, and make sure that we build our economy locally and keep the money in our local communities as well.
Fantastic. We'll come back to some of those policies again. Bill, over to you. There's a specific question which came through earlier, which was, a Labour MP once said every billionaire is a policy failure. What's your view on creation of wealth, which I think most of us here are in the business of doing?
Well, thanks very much. I run a...
You were late, so I got to ask the difficult question.
So they will get their difficult questions later.
Look,
I ran a business for 15 years before I became an MP in 2010. My wife still runs a business, and I recognise the challenges of late payment that are in the brilliant IPSI manifesto. Pretty much everything I can agree with, and pretty much everything matches our manifesto. I recognise the problems of access to finance, the impenetrability as a small business of getting government contracts because of procurement systems. And that's why I'm thrilled our manifesto has a business development agency and a national investment bank at its business heart, both of which are going to help small businesses to start up and to grow. But my wife faces the uncertainty that everybody in our economy does. She saw her turnover fall in half last year as a result of the uncertainty due to Brexit. And I'm sorry, but a hard Brexit advocated by Boris Johnson is not going to end that uncertainty, because as he repeated yesterday, he envisages at the end of next year, after transition, we just leave without a deal, because 11 months or 12 months is not long enough to negotiate the detailed new free trade agreement he is proposing. That is the reality. And we will face the hardest of hard Brexits. It will go on for years and years and years. And that's why it has to be Labour's approach of a final say vote, a choice between a credible leave option and remain that goes back to the public. It's not going to be easy to sort this out, but that is the best way of reducing uncertainty in our economy. And our investment in infrastructure is vital for small and growing businesses. Our investment in skills, 80,000 new apprentices as part of the green economy. We must tackle this climate crisis, but there's a real economic dividend to be had in doing so for businesses large and small. And that's why Labour's plans are right. Yes, we're ambitious, absolutely right. But the question is, when you have a crisis in the climate that faces all of us, a crisis in our health service, a crisis where people in work are relying on food banks, a crisis in our railways, as I described earlier, that will be familiar to all of you for different reasons to the one I described. When you have that scale of crisis, you need to match it with a scale of ambition. It's not a question of whether we can afford the ambition that Labour is proposing. The truth is, we can't afford not to.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bill. Liz, I feel you didn't get enough time a little bit just then, because we gave you 10, 15 seconds. And I do want to come back to a slightly difficult question, actually, at the next stage. I mean, Boris very famously said F business about a year ago. This wasn't long ago.
Been ever since. Huh? Yeah, it's been ever since in his actions.
Well, no, I mean, ever since he sort of wrote back on it. And there was criticism yesterday after the manifesto came out about the lack of detail for businesses. And taking Brexit to one side, I mean, how do you address these criticisms? How do you address these concerns in this room that I actually want to see some proper, hard policies being announced, which would take them through to the next stage of growth?
So first of all, Boris Johnson was a very, very pro-business mayor of London. I think we all saw the city succeed under his stewardship. And he is somebody who, the minute he entered office, changed the narrative about business, made it very clear that he supports free trade, he supports free enterprise. And our manifesto lays out a huge number of policies which are about supporting business, whether it's increasing the number of startup loans, whether it's the review of the burden of business rates, which we intend to lower the total amount of business rates that businesses have to pay, whether it's our policy on exports, giving small businesses more support in terms of exporting overseas, and supporting the employer's allowance rising, which will particularly help small businesses. But more than any of these specific policies, and you can read the manifesto, a copy of which I have with me today, to go through those. Our overall approach is one that embraces the idea that enterprise in this country is a good thing, that entrepreneurs are people we should cheer at, not sneer at. And the fact is, we saw the Labour Party manifesto come out last week. It is a frightening document. I mean, it actively attacks the idea of making a profit. It talks about appropriating property, a huge plan for nationalisation, the highest levels of peacetime in history. And I think if you look at our manifesto, it's realistic, it's deliverable, it's specific, and it shows a way forward. And there's been a lot of fantasy chat about Brexit on this panel today. But the reality is all the other parties in this debate are proposing further referendums, maybe with the exception of the Brexit Party, but they are proposing next year will be spent having 2 more referendums on Brexit and on Scotland. Now, I think the decision was made 3 years ago, and one of the issues that businesses face across this country is continued uncertainty and dither and delay, and we simply cannot have more of that. We need to get on with it. The Prime Minister has secured a very good deal, which people said he couldn't do, but he secured it within 85 days. He secured the deal within 85 days, and we will secure a free trade deal by the end of next year.
11 months.
Really?
Which is tough. I mean, Ed, I mean, just before we get into the broader Brexit chat, I mean, okay, so for the reaction to the business to your manifesto was really favourable. I mean, people liked what was in there. People also didn't think there was a hope in hell of ever seeing that in actual action in politics. So what can the Liberal Democrats bring? Why have you ruled out a coalition, for example? Why don't you come in as a moderating factor in a Conservative coalition or a Labour coalition?
Well, compared to the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, we are the moderates. They have taken their parties to their extremes. And I think it's very bad for our politics and our debate. I believe Liberal Democrats can beat the Tories and Labour in a whole host of seats and ensure that there's a balanced parliament, that Johnson doesn't get his majority, and that is the best way to stop Brexit. And we have said, you're right, that we're not going to put Jeremy Corbyn into number 10. We're not going to put Boris Johnson into number 10. That's a legitimate position to take. And we would use our strengthened forces, voting issue by issue. And yes, we would vote for a people's vote, because that's the quickest way to get Brexit done. Under the Boris Johnson's deal, Brexit's going to take several years. The idea they're going to do a full-blown trade agreement and a security agreement and all the other agreements they're going to need by December next year is fantasy. And if they don't do that, guess what happens? According to the Conservative manifesto yesterday, there's a no-deal Brexit back on the table. An utter disaster. I mean, I am fed up with the politics of this country at the moment, where people just tell bare-faced lies and think they can get away with it. Anyone who's been in trade negotiations, and I was Britain's trade minister for 2 years, I went to the WTO. You can't have a global trade deal by yourself. You know, and I was there when the WTO last global round fell apart under Doha. It fell apart because China and America weren't going to agree. If you want to preserve the free trade traditions of our country, you have got to stop Brexit. You have got to stop this party and stop Boris Johnson. Because not only do we lose the best trade deal we've ever had, the deepest trade deal, access to the single markets, but we lose on day one those other EU trade deals. I helped negotiate the one with South Korea. Fantastic. Now, actually,
we've already secured a rollover on that specific
you have
deal,
indeed, because I'm chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group from South Korea, and I really, really helped that. But all the other trade deals with many other countries have not been rolled over, Liz. As you well know, as Trade Minister, we are going off a cliff. And I think it's absolutely a disgrace. I think we are now the party of business. They've given up the mantle, and that's why their manifesto had nothing on business in it.
If business is Brexit, then
thank you. So it has a huge section in business on it.
What about just about loan charge?
Currently, we have access to free trade with roughly, and by that I mean zero tariff trade, with 55% of the world. So that's
it's
the
the non-tariff trade barriers that matter in a modern world.
You've just asked me about free trade deals. What we are aiming to secure within the next 3 years is free trade with 80%. So those free trade deals with 80% of the world. That will include the US, it will include Australia and Japan. And the reason that the EU has not been able to secure deals with those, well, the US, for example, and Australia, it does have a deal with Japan.
We're not playing part of it.
Which takes 10 years to implement, Ed, because the EU is not willing to enter into agreements in some areas like services, which are UK strengths. So I believe that we can be more free trading once we leave the European Union, as well as securing a good trade deal with the EU.
Well,
the EU wants to do it. We want to do it. We're already trading at zero tariffs with the EU.
Why did you
to
roll
say
out,
this is impossible, I think,
why
is
did Boris roll out a transition?
defeatism.
Why did Boris roll out an extension of a transition period? I mean, that just seemed like a cliff edge which business did not want to face in another month's time.
Because we know it is absolutely doable to secure a free trade deal in that time. This is a very different circumstance from two countries that don't currently free trade with each other, striking a new deal. We already have arrangements in place. It's in the EU's interest to secure that deal, and it's in our interest. And I do think there's an awful lot of negative chat. There was negative chat about Boris renegotiating and reopening the withdrawal agreement. But the fact is, he managed to do that
only
within
because he changed a negotiating position totally against what he said. He said there wouldn't be a customs union down the Irish Sea, and he just reneged on it and threw the DUP to the wolves. We were stupid enough to believe it.
Let's go from history to the future. So, Bill, I mean, what exactly is the Labour? That's on the future, by the way. But what is the Labour policy on Brexit? Because no one can really understand it. Corbyn is neutral. I mean, this is a party which is neither here nor there anymore for a fundamental policy which everyone cares about here. You've got two sides very clearly demarcated, and you've got Labour somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, mind you, as Ed did admit on Mar the other week that he would quite happily prop up the Boris Johnson.
No, I did not. That's completely untrue.
Well, they were in your words.
No, they weren't my words.
They were your words. I watched
you
it.
know that's not true.
I watched it, and the problem with that, of course, is that you're pursuing hard Brexit by any other name. So, yeah, we have to avoid hard Brexit. Liz has just said it takes 10 years to negotiate an international trade agreement.
No, I didn't say that.
Yes, you did. You just
I said it takes 10 years for the EU to implement their deal with Japan.
There you go.
That's
so,
specifically
thank you very much.
what I said.
Thank you for coming. And it would take...
Avoid a free trade agreement with the EU altogether and just go for a WTO.
This is the first example in history of an international trade agreement trying to undo existing close relationships. It is absolutely balmy to try and do it this way. So that's why our policy is you either have a customs union single market deal, which we know from the discussions that we've had with the EU is possible. It's something that could have been done a long time ago had Theresa May bothered to work cross-party right at the start of the discussions. We know we can get that in 3 months. 6 months gives us time to get the referendum underway. You then get resolution one way or the other, either with that close economic relationship leave or with remain, which allows business the certainty of being able to carry on because there won't be the necessity to negotiate a new trade deal. That, I think, is pretty straightforward. It gives a close relationship, whichever the result of the referendum is, and it is the best way of trying to bring together a fundamentally divided country and start to move on, whether that's for business or for anyone else.
Would Jeremy Corbyn agree, would a party led by someone other than Jeremy Corbyn who had a clearer view on this have a better chance of getting into power?
Well, Jeremy's the leader, and he's going to be the leader on election day. Somewhat pointless election. Look, the polls are getting tighter. We saw them get tighter in 2017. I think there is a long way to go. We are still aiming to try and win the election. And if we win the election, that will be at the heart of our policy. And the trouble with the Conservatives is the reason there's so little in Liz's manifesto is because the fundamental cornerstone of her manifesto is a hard Brexit that she knows only too well will cause enormous damage to our economy and to businesses up and down the country.
Okay, well, I think we'll move on from Brexit just because I think otherwise we're going to get bogged down. Although I do want to come to you, I do really appreciate the two parties here, particularly the Brexit party.
It is, and you should be looking at our manifesto because the Tories copy everything that we do.
What is the point of that? Okay, some of you first. What is the point of the Brexit party when we've got the Conservatives?
Because we provide them with the ideas which they are now
well, that's
implementing.
Why they did the deal,
if you look at the manifesto they're having today, it is our 2015 manifesto. They will be taking quite a lot of our ideas. In fact, they've even changed. You look at the way they've changed their colours. They're almost doing everything that Nigel Farage seems to be doing, at least because they want to emulate what we're doing. But as far as policies are concerned, you see that our policy to eliminate business rates, now they're talking about reducing business rates, but going to what the Conservatives have actually done for business. And Liz was saying that I'm one of her heroes because I'm a business owner, but unfortunately the Conservative Party have not demonstrated that. If you look at GDPR, for example, the implementation of GDPR, which comes directly from the EU, which has affected small businesses throughout the country, because you're basically making small businesses act as if they were large business enterprises, as if they were Google in the way in which they implement European legislation. There is no distinction between those two. David Cameron also introduced pensions regulations so that individuals would abrogate their responsibility to plan for their own pension and put that burden onto employers. So if you look at the Conservatives' track record on this, it's actually quite terrible in the way in which they have burdened small businesses. So really, I don't really feel like you are our heroes, but thanks to our manifesto, you will probably be changing many of your policies, particularly on those two things, especially if we can get rid of GDPR in the way in which it is implemented in this country.
Well, let's not go in the cat's way. The GDPR is a global thing rather than something to maybe blame the Conservatives on. But, Amelia, sorry, we glossed over. You didn't mention your Brexit policy. I'm particularly interested to hear your immigration policy, because we haven't touched on immigration. So it's so important, isn't it?
Well, I'll begin with our policy on Brexit, because we've heard a lot of talk about deals today. And fundamentally, the best deal that we can have as a country is the deal that we already have. And it's small businesses that I know are in fear about what the future could look like if we leave the EU, especially if we leave without a deal. And we've heard a lot about free trade, but also the European Union that I believe in is a European Union of human rights, of workers' rights, of environmental protection and peace. It's the best place to work on our international problems, whether that's climate change or even tax dodging. And I know the role of tax dodging on our high street specifically. That means that you could be selling the same product, but having to pay more tax because the shop down the road is avoiding their tax, using tax havens within Europe and around the world. It's been Green MEPs who have been working to challenge that, because we know when we cooperate and collaborate, we can find solutions to these huge problems. And so as the Green Party, we believe in a people's vote, because we believe in that final say that Leave voters can state their intentions again if they haven't changed, and the same for Remain, and that people's vote will be that final say on our future of Europe, because we've got a lot of healing to do in this country, and we see it as the best way to achieve that. So for that people's vote, we would campaign for Remain, but give the opportunity for those who voted Leave to have that say.
I would like now to bring the discussion away from Brexit if possible, just I know it's on everyone's minds, but we can talk about, a lot of the people we have here in the audience, the self-employed, the entrepreneurs. And what would you do if your parties came into power to improve the rights of the self-employed in particular? We're hearing a lot of concern around the IR35 and the loan charge repeal, for example, which a lot of people find confusing and indeed unfair and potentially very dangerous for them. There aren't the rights around paid leave. Training for self-employed people is so difficult, isn't it? So what specifically are you going to bring in as a policy to improve the situation, the rights and the conditions that self-employed people get to work in? And Bill, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. Having been there and got several of the T-shirts over the years, access to mortgages, access to pensions, sick pay, holiday pay, these are all elements of being self-employed that need addressing. And I know IPSI and a number of other groups are working hard on, and it's in the manifesto that they've produced. And I think that is the kind of approach that we need to do. But look, you mentioned IR35. And the way it's been implemented, I'm afraid, just speaks volumes about the very slapdash approach that the Tories have taken to the self-employed, because in the public sector, it's been implemented right across the board, causing real problems for self-employed professionals who need to get contracts, and causing real problems for the public sector as well. We're seeing a reduction in the availability of skilled workers in the health service and elsewhere as a result. So there needs to be a fundamental review. It should never have been implemented in one go. And we absolutely can't see it rolled out into the private sector the way things are at the moment. But we need to support the self-employed in this country, the professional self-employed, and we need to make sure that our tax system is fit for purpose so that it matches the needs of being self-employed and also is consistent with the risk that is taken.
Would you consider tax breaks? Would you consider tax breaks? I mean, broadly, the manifesto is all about tax increases, but how can you encourage entrepreneurs and self-employed? Is it through incentives? Is it through tax breaks?
Well, as you say, the manifesto is, our manifesto is about increasing taxes to pay for investment. That's absolutely right. But we're also looking at increasing the investment in R&D. We're looking at giving much greater support across the economy there. We're looking at the introduction of our business development agency will provide the kind of support and advice that is readily available elsewhere in the world, but is really patchy in this country. The National Investment Bank with regional delivery of it. The Post Bank offering proper business banking facilities up and down the country, something that just isn't available to many people in business at the moment. These are the kind of measures that will provide a much fairer system. I touched on late payment in my opening comments. It's something that really hits self-employed people very, very hard. We will use the procurement system to make sure that big firms that are getting government contracts have to pay in 30 days, and they have to demonstrate a track record of payment in 30 days to continue getting those contracts. And we'll also use the Australian system of binding arbitration and fines for persistent late payment. I recommended that in the Bill Committee in 2015 when the Small Business Commissioner was set up. Sadly, the Conservatives didn't listen to that proposal. So we've now seen the resignation of the first Small Business Commissioner because he just hasn't been able to do the job with the 12 members of staff. They've done everything they can. They work extremely hard, but frankly, when there's £26 billion in late payments every year, 12 people simply are not in a position to address it. So I think there's a range of measures needed to provide that support.
Thank you very much. Amelia.
In my opening statements, I did talk about the universal basic income, which, as I said, is an amount given to every citizen in the UK to make sure that people are able to do what they want rather than being held back from opportunity by not having a stable baseline that they can build on. So that universal basic income is a chance for entrepreneurs and small businesses, as well as people who are self-employed, to basically take them through tougher periods and know that they've got that financial support there without having to go through checkbox exercises of other kinds of support. And I think that this is, but we also want to work on things like prompt payment. The small businesses that I talk to, this is one of their biggest issues. And we've seen the effect that that's had across the country, with some small businesses finding that the companies they've worked for have gone bust, or some small businesses ending up going bust themselves as a result of not getting payment in on time from a number of different contractors. And I think that so the way that we want to do it is by making sure that we are that we're committing that if large companies fail to pay small businesses on time, then that urgent action is needed, that we will fine any administration that doesn't go through at the same rate as HMRC, so that's 5% of tax after 30 days and another 5% after 6 months to ensure that we are tackling that. But I mean, the government is taking small steps on this at the moment. The current suggestion of a small business commissioner, so that's a kind of ombudsman but with less teeth. It just shows that there might be sanctions for the worst offenders rather than taking real action that speeds up the time that gets the money from those big businesses into your accounts. And I think it's so vital that we tackle that. And the regional banks have been brought up, and this is part of our Green New Deal, about having local regional banks that invest in small businesses and support those wanting to work in green industries. Most entrepreneurs that I've been speaking to recently see the environmental sector as an area of opportunity, creating future-proofed ideas about where their businesses could go or where new business could come in. And giving that financial support at the local level, I think, is vital as well.
Thank you very much, Hector. And without mentioning Brexit, I mean, would you repeal?
I can do that. I can do that. I can deal actually with IR35, some of the issues which have been
the loan charge, and indeed some of the broader ideas about the rights of the self-employed, which we haven't really touched on.
Yes, exactly, and I'd look into those, and I'll actually address those here. In respect to IR35, I think this is really a law which the government has passed and successive governments have looked into, which doesn't really address the way that people change their behavior whenever the government tries to extract more money from them. And quite recently, when the government decided to make declaration of their tax status to large companies, which mostly employ people under IR35, it was quite clear that they were just simply going to find ways around it, particularly by changing the scheduling of contracts and creating project work, or by changing the way in which you can have substitutions within those contracts. So ultimately, individuals change their behavior, and then the government, as a result, has been trying to create additional taxes, for example, on directors, which is exactly why we would eliminate IR35, because it doesn't really look into the behavior of human beings, because ultimately, people will be changing the structure of their own contracts in order to evade the tax altogether, which only creates then a problem, an increasing problem for HMRC to collect the tax. That only increases administrative burdens now for large businesses, because they now have to declare for other individuals. So as a tax, actually, it does not work, simply because people are too mobile and they can change the way they are. Now, in respect to late payments, governments of all shapes and sizes always want to see that they can do something to make the world better. Unfortunately, for late payments, the biggest culprits are people like governments, that they don't pay their subcontractors much, or on time. The other thing is big businesses. But this is a cultural change. And cultural changes don't necessarily come about because government simply mandates a law that a change should occur. Because if you look at business relationships, if, for example, we have a particular law that allows a small business or any size business to take another business to court, or maybe get fixed payments, which do exist already. We do already have in the laws fixed payment clauses. The idea is that the relationship, the business relationship, would be affected under those conditions. So really, government is not necessarily the right vehicle for that. We can name and shame companies, we can name and shame government departments that are very bad at being able to do that. And government has some control over those issues, but it doesn't have control over the way that other companies run their businesses. And as it's mostly large companies that are the biggest culprits of that, naming and shaming, creating bad PR is probably a better thing.
We're running out of time. Ed, coming to you, so succinctly, what are you going to do for the small business owners?
Well, first of all, we need to celebrate self-employment and contractors. In our economy, we need a more flexible approach, and contractors and self-employed have provided that with all the new different things we have to do, particularly in IT, but not just in IT, where there are projects that need to be done, and people can set their own business up, take responsibility for their lives, and do some fantastic things. But the problem is the government, time and time again, has made it much more difficult. The classic issue in recent times has been the loan charge. I set up the all-party group on the loan charge because I thought it was a scandal. Not closing tax avoidance. Tax avoidance was right to be closed. But the retrospective nature of the loan charge, which basically went back to some people 20 years, even years where their tax affairs have been closed. No government can claim it's on the side of a flexible workforce of contractors and the self-employed when it does that to them. It was a disgrace. It is a disgrace. If we have any power in the next parliament, we will abolish the retrospective nature of the loan charge. We will go after the promoters, which have got away scot-free in too many instances by the government. And we want to make sure HMRC starts actually behaving in a lawful way. I think some of its behavior has been quite shocking. And that is one specific example of the wider issue around IR35. Now, when Philip Hammond, as Conservative Chancellor, put up dividend tax by 7%, I thought then they would actually back off, because that was in many ways addressing some of the tax loopholes. It wasn't present. I had taken a sabbatical from Parliament, in other words, I'd lost my seat in 2015, and I set up a little bit of business, and that little tax hike hit me. But I could sort of see the underlying economic reasons to stop tax avoidance. But now they've done that, why are they still not understanding that IR35 is a very, very difficult and sensitive tool? And by putting it in the hands, the administration in the hands of the larger companies, being the public sector or the private sector, it has a whole set of unintended consequences. And I think it's going to undermine the flexibility of self-employed people on the contractors, and that must be reviewed.
Reviewed what revealed.
One final thing. I was very proud when I was a business minister. I got a major deregulation from the EU. I was told by my Conservative colleagues I couldn't do it. I was told it was impossible even by some of my civil servants. When we got the annual audit under the Accounting Directive in 1977, we got that micro companies employing 9 or fewer people got exempted from that. That was the biggest deregulation of the coalition, and I'm proud it was a Liberal Democrat minister who delivered that. We need to think in all tax policy about the smaller people, the smaller businesses, the self-employed.
Will the Conservatives do that, Liz?
Well, what we are going to do is we're going to look across the board at self-employment, have a proper review, and look at how we can make it easier for people who are self-employed to succeed, to deal with government, to remove some of the complexity and red tape. And I'm incredibly proud as a country that we do very well in terms of self-employment. We're seeing an increasing number of people self-employed. It's a great way to work. It's flexible. You have control of your own life. There are lots of opportunities. But I do think that the way that often many public sector organisations are set up tend to be based on an employer rather than the self-employed, and we are gradually changing that. So, for example, tax-free childcare is available for those who are self-employed as well as those who are employed. Previously, childcare vouchers weren't, and in fact, we've just rolled out a new policy in our manifesto, £1 billion more into after-school and preschool childcare. So more parents who are self-employed and employed can get that kind of support. And I think there are all kinds of areas that we need to look at, and we will look at in our review to make sure that we are treating people who are self-employed fairly. Because as the economy becomes more flexible, as the opportunities grow, because the barriers to start new businesses are lower, we will look at all of those things. I can't answer exactly what the results of that review will be at this stage. That is a policy that we announced in our manifesto. We're also looking at changing government procurement rules. The fact is the OJU rules that operate at the moment often mitigate against small businesses winning contracts. You often have to have previous business with the government. It can become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. So we're going to review that. We're going to make it much easier for small businesses to bid for government contracts. And we do want to give more teeth to the Small Business Commissioner, particularly on issues like late payments. So they are able to levy fines. And that's something we've committed to in our manifesto, which is out yesterday. And I hope you've got more opportunities. But I do think it's a bit rich hearing from the Labour Party about research and development. Well, the fact is they have promised, well, he specifically raised this issue.
We promised to raise it to 3% of GDP.
You have said that you're getting rid of the R&D tax credit.
No, not
which
for,
is
not
something
for SMEs.
that I think.
Not for SMEs, Liz. Read the policy, read the manifesto. It actually has the detail.
Well,
for
we are
SMEs,
increasing the R&D
We know it's poorly targeted. It shouldn't be going to large businesses, and you've kept it lower than it should be. We are committed to raising it to 3% of GDP. That's not a commitment you'll hear from the Conservatives.
I'll tell you what Labour and Conservatives are both doing. They've got a lot of reviews.
I would like to say there is a lot of, but I would like to go to the floor now. So can we, is Paul Durant, Durant? Before I said your name wrong, apologies. Durant, please.
There you go. Paul Durant, PDT Sales Consultancy. I'm also an advisor member for Enterprise Nation. My question is, what would your party do to address the really unfair business rates regime that is stifling small businesses and is clearly unfit for purpose?
Liz, from Sotna.
I am going to answer this question with a review.
Can we be succinct?
We've already, in our manifesto, committed to lowering business rates further for high street, pubs, music venues, shops, and we're conducting a bigger review which will lower the burden altogether. So it will mean that the Treasury receives less revenue from business rates, we make it fairer, and we lower the cost of business, because we do recognise it's a massive issue for businesses across the country.
We asked the Liberal Democrat Business and Enterprise Network if they could look into this 2 years ago, and they produced this document in September 2018. It's called Replacing Business Rates, Taxing Land, Not Investment, and it's now official Liberal Democrat policy. It's got a huge detail about the economics, What we're proposing to do is replace the business rates with a commercial landowner levy. What essentially that will do is we'll stop the penalisation of people who improve their properties, improve their machinery and plant. The disinvestment for that is nonsense, and that therefore it needs to go. Taxing land is far more efficient, it's much cheaper to do. Actually, I hear the Green Party in favour. That's great. But also, it will make sure that the liability goes to the landowner, the landlord, which is much fairer. Now, some of that will be passed on in higher rent, I have no doubt. But we calculate from the economic analysis we did that 92% of businesses will be better off with this proposal.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Hector.
I would actually agree on the issue of land tax. Now, our policy is basically to eliminate business rates and then replace it with a simpler system. If I'm looking to lobby our policy for that, I would actually agree with land tax. It's something that I looked at when I was an economist many years ago, and it's actually a very efficient system. However, one of the issues that have to be raised is when you're expanding land taxation, are you going to include farmland?
No.
Are you going to be looking? No, I'm not asking you a question. But it is a question. It is a question when you're looking at changing tax. So when I said initially that if we're going to be looking at changing business rates, we have to have an overall look at the way that taxation is made across this whole country, because it is a large part of taxation. It accounts for £29 billion, and you cannot just simply eliminate it and then not replace it with something that is going to be providing as much tax as possible. But what we should be looking at, and this is one of the things none of the parties here have addressed, is actually reducing the size of government. Because even in our manifesto, which is fully costed,
we haven't got much time.
But it is an important question. Well, rather than spending the money tree,
not the question from the floor.
It is not a money question for the tree, but it is important in relation to business rates.
On business rates, I mean, let's talk about the Greens policy, please.
I just want to say that with all the talks of reviews coming from the Conservative Party, if something wasn't working, then they've had 10 years to change that. And I think that business rates is a key part of that. In coalition with the Liberal Democrats.
No, hold on. Liz said something that needs to, she said she blamed the Liberal Democrat coalition. In the coalition, we asked to reform the business rates, and the Tories stopped us.
Okay, Amelia, please continue.
The rates system is broken, which is why we favour similar tax to the Lib Dems of having a land value tax. At the moment, retail accounts for 5% of the economy, but you're paying 25% of the rates of business rates. And this just shows how vital it is to change that. I know that you've experienced the brunt of gentrification in communities, and it's by making sure that we are actually properly taxing changes when there is new infrastructure that makes our communities more vibrant, that it's not small businesses that are taking the brunt of that. So a land value tax, which is supported by groups like the Institute of Economic Affairs, is a key way to deliver that change.
Thank you. Bill.
Yeah, well, thanks. And yeah, but the Lib Dems were in government for 5 of those 10 years. I'm glad Liz reminded us of that. And Ed wants to go back into coalition with them.
No,
what he said on nonsense. But look, it's not just about rates, because on our high streets and in our retail sector, there are very many other challenges, aren't there? To do with the failure of the last 10 years in government, where we've seen a crisis in living standards, where people haven't got money in their pockets to go and support our retail sector. And that's why, whilst we, like the Tories, but I suspect in a different way, will have a review, and we are looking favourably at land value tax as part of that, we think there's a lot more to be done than just looking at rates. We've got to turn our high streets and our town centres into the heart of the community again. It's historically what they were there for. We've got to get people working there in work-based hubs, which again is an ICAEW proposal, which we agree with. We've got to have people living there. We've got to have free bus travel for the under 25s. We've got to have good leisure offers and evening economies in our town centres and high streets. So rates is definitely a key part of the challenge. And we've got to do something about rents too. It's something in my constituency that comes up all the time. It isn't just the rates. How do we reduce rents? How do we work on those absentee landlords? And that's why we'd come up with an empty property register. And as an interim step, something we announced a year or so ago, we would remove the double rating on plant and equipment, which is across both in manufacturing and quite often in retail as well. So it's definitely got to be reformed, but whether I was looking at a 25 billion income stream to the Exchequer and not the 29.
That was 31.
It's a significant number, and
31 last time I checked.
We've got to replace that revenue one way or another.
Hopefully, one last question. Michael Hilton. Is Michael Hilton here tonight? Can he answer this question?
Thank you. I'm Michael Hilton. I'm a freelance project manager. My question's about staffing, really. When I'm trying to resource projects that go beyond the next Brexit cliff edge, what assumptions can I make about EU nationals?
Back to Brexit.
Well, I reject the premise of the question. What we want to have is an Australian points-based system that makes sure that we are open to the talent that we need, the people that we need to help our economy grow. And that we will do that across the board. We've just announced, for example, an increase in the numbers in the seasonal agricultural workers scheme to help in farms. We've increased the number of PhDs in subjects like maths and physics into the country, likewise doctors. But what we need to make sure is we are bringing people into this country who are going to contribute to the economy and are going to help business. And that is the best way of doing it. One of the many reasons that people voted to leave the EU was to end free movement of people, which didn't give us control over who was coming into our country. And what we want is a controlled system of immigration that does bring the people in who we need and who will contribute to our economy.
What's been one of the only highlights of the opinion in the country since the referendum was there's been an increase in support for immigration, because the debate that's been engendered has shown that actually immigrants do a huge amount in our society, in our economy, and it should be celebrated. And the only way you, sir, can be sure is if you help those of us who want to stop Brexit and we'll get rid of this nonsense. If we're faced with it, I'm afraid you've got several years of uncertainty. Conservatives have published immigration white papers, not quite sure what the income threshold is going to be. What you can be sure of is it'll cost them, it'll cost you, there'll be delays. And the Home Office, and I deal with the Home Office an awful lot as a constituency MP, they are completely unpredictable. So you'll be faced with a system that's costly, that's delayed, that's unpredictable, whether it's called an Australian point system or whatever system. But it's going to be very difficult if you're trying to put projects together, trying to get highly skilled people or, frankly, less well-skilled people. Think of all those construction workers we're going to need if we're going to actually do the sort of construction investment that the parties have been talking about. Ending free movement of labour is a really retrograde step for our economy and our society, and Liberal Democrats reject it. That's one of the many reasons we want to stay in the EU.
As an immigrant, what you may not realize is that I'm an immigrant from El Salvador, which is outside of the EU, for those of you who don't know where it might be or may not find it in the map. But the system that we, as the Brexit Party, proposed, which now the Conservatives have used in their manifesto, would actually make it easier for people from outside of the EU who are capable, who are able then to work, because we've created a system that is fair to everybody and doesn't penalize you if you're not, by the birth of lottery, being born in the EU, so that we get the very best talent and the very best immigration for this country. So I don't think you need to worry about that. You will get the very best talent, because only the very best talent will be willing to come to this country when it is open to the globe.
Why did Nigel Farage stand in front of that poster? Exactly.
You have to ask Nigel Farage for that.
A disgraceful act.
You have to ask Nigel Farage for that. But the point is that
stirring up
immigrants like myself,
division. That was
immigrants like myself, and you have to look at many of the people in our party who are also immigrants from outside of the EU.
Well, your leader
see that as benefit. You can attack the leader any way you want, but you can attack me as I'm here.
Chaps, wind up. So, please, two more.
But you're avoiding the question to me, aren't you?
This whole discussion where we're talking about people like a bargaining chip, people who have come to work here or move abroad, to the opportunity that we've had as a result of being in the European Union to live, love and work in 27 other member countries is an incredible gift that we have. And as the Green Party, we will always celebrate those people who have come to this country to make it richer as a result of our diversity. It's one of the reasons why when we talk about Europe, we don't just talk about the freedom of movement of money, we talk about the freedom of movement of people and what that does, how that supports our businesses, our communities. And any two-tier system means that you're looking at people, families divided if they don't have enough money. Who are these best people? Are they going to be the people who will look after us in our NHS hospitals in our hour of need? Will they be people who will support our farmers to do seasonal work of growing our crops? The best people have come to this country and done incredible things as a result of that opportunity we have. And this is one of the reasons why it is vital that we state that the best deal we have is the current deal, and that we work to remain in the European Union.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Bill.
One of the worst things that have happened in this country over the last 9 years, particularly over the last 4 or 5, has been the rise in assaults and abuse of a hateful nature, often on the basis of race, stoked in part by what Ed said about that poster, but it's been going on before that. The creation of the hostile environment by the then Home Secretary, and ever since, is a shameful episode in British history. It has set citizen against citizen. We now have a situation where families cannot be certain that they can stay together because of the attitude towards Brexit. And the losers are those families and their children, and the losers are employers and our economy as well. And our answer to this is not just to encourage immigration for people who are being paid more than $30,000 a year. We cannot have an arbitrary figure like that in our economy. In hospitality, in retail, in agriculture, people are paid far less than $30,000 a year. In construction too. And in the care sector, we depend on foreign workers in our health and care system. Our older people, our disabled people are often cared for by people from overseas. We have to support them. We have to say that this country is a welcoming place. So our approach is sector by sector to meet the needs of employers, not to have arbitrary targets. And that has to be right across the economy.
So, thank you very much. Right, we have very sadly run up against time, and our politicians, our MPs on stage will have to leave now, but please do thank them all in the usual way. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Host, would you like to stay on stage? Would you like to stay on stage as we do this? Me. Should we grill you now?
No.
Shall we do our second poll?
Absolutely.
Shall we see if this wonderful discussion changed anybody's voting intentions? So this is very interesting. Actually, every other time we've done this, we've left the panelists on stage, so they've seen this. So I feel as if that they have. No, that's fine. They had to run off, and they might be pleased that they did. So we're on 88. I think we stopped at 90 last time. So to try and keep this as reflective as possible. Can anyone remember what the figure was before? I think it was 30-30-ish. It was neck and neck, was it? And sorry, was there a comment there from the audience? 36-39? That was very analytical, sir. 36-39, 3 and 3. We are now looking at a post-panel debate. Voting intention of Conservatives, 24%. Labour, 11%. What was Labour on pre-debate? 20. Oh, so down for Labour, down for Conservatives, but a whopping great big up for the Liberal Democrats, up to 54%. Green Party up 7%, and Brexit Party up by 1% to 4%. So they are the headlines and that's with 103. So that's the same reflection of the vote pre the debate. So ladies and gentlemen, I do hope you've enjoyed it this evening. Just before you go away, please join me in thanking our excellent chair for the evening, Dan Thomas, Executive News Editor of the Financial Times. Good man. Good man.